بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم افتح لنا فتوح العارفين، وفقنا توفيق الصالحين. اللهم علمنا بالقرآن بذكر الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يقربنا منك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا، وجعل الحسن إذا شئت سهلا. اللهم أعذنا من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا، واصلح لنا شأننا. لا إله إلا أنت، أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. نويت تعلم وتعليم ونفع انتفع تذكر تذكيرا والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على تمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم، ودعاء للهدى دعاة الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى، وما نوينا شيوخنا من صالح النيات والأعمال. So welcome to the third session on the fiqh of marriage according to the Maliki school. So first one or two slides might be a review, but there's a little bit more detail. So inshallah, and then we'll continue. And inshallah, today will be the last session. We'll take a short break in the middle because there's a lot of slides to do. And I wanted to finish these sessions before my travel. So Bismillah. So this is a review with a little bit more detail on the next slide. This is something that comes up regularly, so I just wanted to review it. The husband is not required to support her financially, meaning the wife, until they have been alone together, or he has invited her to consummate the marriage. So he has invited her to consummate the marriage with the condition that she is someone the likes of who has the physical strength to withstand intercourse, because and that needs to be assessed by people of experience. Is she somebody, does she have the body, is she able to withstand intercourse? He provides for her based on her social status and his financial ability. So if she knows that he's not at her financial status, he's not, and she's fine with that, or he mentions to her, these are the things that I cannot support you on right now financially, and she's fine with that. That's a right that she's given up. So then it's not, she has to be patient then at that point. Childbirth, he must provide for whatever is suitable for her and whatever is the customary practice. So, and he is required to pay for the midwife. If he is from a community where women are provided with servants, we mentioned this, and do not perform domestic chores, then he must serve her, even if she's not from a social status where domestic help is present. So, I grew up in a community where, even the upper or middle class had servants. So, if he can't afford it, and she comes from a community where they typically have servants, then he would, if she does any of these chores, then she knows that it's not something she has to do. So that's her ihsan, that's her showing excellence in her deen. So it's so fiqh will talk about the rules and the rights, but it won't necessarily mention what's excellent in the deen, what's above beyond. So letting go of our rights, taking on a little bit more. So, and one has to manage oneself, because sometimes one can do a little bit more, sometimes some days are low iman days, so one can do a little bit less. So it's important to know oneself, and so it's really, really important to take purification of the heart and be self-aware, so that when those buttons get pushed, one knows, okay, well, this is for me. I just need to read a little bit more Quran today. I need to do this. I need to slow down. I need to strengthen my connection with Allah. She has to do domestic chores if the above is not the case, meaning she's not from a community where women are provided with servants. The husband ensure that the wife learns that which is obligatory upon her. So he's he's responsible for a lot of things, subhanAllah, for the education of the children, making sure, making sure that her deen is correct. And a lot of times it's, it's the other way around now, that the women are spiritually supporting the men. And one thing I've noticed, that a lot of times men, especially in the West, they're going out to work all day, and so they're not, they're not somewhere where they can hear the adhan, and maybe they're doing their prayers quickly, doing wudu, who knows how. And so they're spiritually getting very drained, whereas women are homeschooling. They're able to do dhikr in the car. They're able to, they're around children who are going to be light, spiritual light. And so they increase in faith, and they realize they need to learn. Sometimes the realization comes after somebody has children. And so the women grow spiritually, and they're protected generally, because they're even if they're leaving the house, but it's not like being in a, working for a company where one's around non-Muslims all day. So women might grow spiritually, and the men tend to, sometimes they've gotten further away from the deen. And I've seen this, subhanAllah. And so it's really important for the women to realize this, and to know that. So they might have to carry some of the spiritual some of the spiritual burden, so to speak, even if they're not responsible for a husband's deen. And it's really the other way around. But the reality is, so that would be ihsan from their point, to, okay, well, this is what's going on for the men in the community. They don't hear the adhan all day. There's shayateen all over, because, when the adhan is heard, the shaitan runs away, and so, there's all these. And if there's a place where angels are necessarily not going to be around, the shayateen are going to be there. So, it causes a lot of waswasa, even if people don't realize it. So it's important for people to be aware of this, and what people who are out in the workforce all day, especially in a non-Muslim environment where they don't hear any dhikr, where Allah's name and the Prophet's name is not mentioned at all, that it slowly eats away at their deen. And somebody might not realize it, that this is happening to their spouse, until it's, it starts to get really bad. But when they start to vocalize things, when people start to leave the prayer, it's because their faith has been diminishing for years usually, and they haven't done anything to replenish it. So it's something that needs to be done daily, and it never should be taken for granted at all. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ, he never took it for granted, subhanAllah, and his heart had been washed. If you take all the main riwayat, 4 times, and he was perfect, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But how much Quran did he read every day, and how much did the Sahaba read? And they maintained their prayers with the praying behind the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were so worried that if they missed even a takbir behind the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the opening takbir, that was so stressful to them. And people should do the congregation even in the home. Right, even if it's 2, even a husband and wife pray, that's a congregation in the home. So, and one should establish that to keep the shayateen out. So a lot of these problems arise because people's faith is diminishing, and they don't realize it. Or it was never really there, other than very, very basic deen from the beginning. So, okay, more details on financial support. She's required to perform it's called khidma batina, so, domestic chores in the house, including cooking, making the flour, fetching water, and the like, for her husband. These are some of the things that are mentioned in the commentary of the Risalah. So again, this is assuming that, she wasn't somebody who grew up with servants. If he's in dire straits financially when she married him, then he does not have to serve her. So she came from a group community where, she grew up with servants, and he can't afford it. But she knew that going into the marriage, and she accepted that. Then he doesn't have to serve her, because it's a right that she has given up. Even if she is from a status where a domestic help is the norm, her marrying him, knowing his status, is a sign of her acceptance of this tribulation. So, one should be very aware of one's rights and know what one is giving up, and what one's okay with. And if it's a righteous brother or a woman, the main thing is making sure that one's growing together spiritually, and that one raises one's children properly. So, the things that one sees in one's spouse that are problematic. So then just, think of how that person was raised and make sure that your children are not raised that way. Because alhamdulillah, it's never too late, so that somebody else doesn't have to deal with the same issues that you have to deal with because because the children were raised properly. So if one doesn't want to be tough with one's children because it's difficult, one should think of, okay, they're going to marry somebody and I want to make sure that they don't go through the headache that I'm going through because the person I'm married to was spoiled, And that's a lot of what it is, that people are spoiled and they develop big egos and and they're not given responsibility from a young age, like from 8, 9, 10, they're not doing a lot of work around the house and stuff like that. They just grow up self-absorbed. So and it makes it, a piece of it makes it very difficult, especially when they're married, for the other person. Okay, so here, going on to another topic, contracts and religion of the spouses. One thing I can say, pretty much all of my teachers, all of my male teachers were very, very responsible. What I know of especially their mothers, that their mothers are very strict with the boys and gave them a lot of responsibility, a lot. I mean, some of them didn't even have food to eat on certain days. It was just dates. So I was mentioning to somebody yesterday that one of my teacher's mothers, she left her like two or all three of her sons with one of the shiuch at a very young age. She was a widow, and she just, and at a certain age, the boys don't listen to women. They'll just kind of, they'll push and push and push, and they'll, get around their mothers. And so she left him. And so traditionally, after a certain age, men should be raised by only men. Otherwise, it's a disaster usually. And mashallah, the sheikh he's so strong, and he can, mashallah, just really takes on a lot of responsibility. Another one of my teachers, his parents were divorced, and he's working on his grandfather's farm at the age of, I think, 14, a lot of responsibility. I know another one went through a lot of, mother, again, was a single parent raising a lot of kids and didn't have much food probably in the home. And so he took on responsibility at a very, very early age. And really, those are the men that I see just really having good marriages, taking on a responsibility of the ummah. But vast majority of the men are just, unfortunately, they're mama's boys. You can kind of see it without even seeing what's going on in the home. So just, we have to break the cycle at some point and just go beyond our egos and what we naturally want to do. Because a lot of the deen is just breaking our natural inclinations to do things that really are not good for our deen, or the deen of some of our children or those around us. And it makes it difficult for other people if we don't do that, because we're not living, we're a community. So children being raised wrong, it affects other people. SubhanAllah. Okay, if one of the spouses apostates, so a'udhu billah, and there's a lot of this going on. So, slowly, especially with the men, I've noticed their deen disintegrates. So they might be married, but they're just at work all day, and their deen goes, they're not doing stuff to maintain their deen. They're not praying in congregation. And the men tend to be thicker skinned, which is a blessing. But then part of being thicker skinned is they don't realize that their deen is, it's gone as downhill as much as it has, and it counts. So if he apostates, and usually it's been years of the heart hardening, and then things start coming out of the mouth, because what comes out of the mouth is only a reflection of what's in the heart. And so it's been in the heart for a long time, slowly. Shaitan works very, very slowly and subtly, right? And so he's consistent, just like we're supposed to be consistent on good, he's consistent with, slowly getting to the person, a'udhu billah. So you'll be surprised at how many people are actually leaving the deen. And if one of the spouse apostates, the contract is canceled, and it's an irrevocable divorce, which means he can't take her back in even if she's in her iddah. It's just automatically. I mean, she has to do an iddah, but if he becomes Muslim, or she becomes Muslim again, they have to redo the contract even if she's in her iddah. So it's irrevocable. It's not a raj'i divorce that he can take her back if she's in her iddah. They have to renew the contract. Unless it's been 3 divorces, then obviously he cannot take her back unless she marries somebody else. And it's a big mess. And children are the ones who suffer. The children are the ones who suffer. And then so and then it just okay. If 2 believers are married, so this is a good news, who are already married and they become Muslim, their marriage contract is affirmed. So alhamdulillah, so that's good news. So technically, the Sharia doesn't. It's not that we think their contract is valid, but subhanallah, it's just this is such a mercy that it's affirmed. If they become Muslim, their marriage contract is affirmed, and not that we think their contracts are valid in the Sharia. No, they're not. But these are some exceptions given to non-believers who become Muslim. So they're both disbelievers, and they both become Muslim, irrespective of what deen they come from, and their marriage is affirmed. So this is if they become Muslim pretty much at the same time. So now, if he becomes Muslim and she's from the people of the book, so she can only be from the people of the book, a Jew or a Christian, the marriage is affirmed, right? And this is, again, it's not because their contract is considered valid in the Sharia, but it's affirmed. It's a mercy for them. And here it's an enticement that she will become Muslim. So if he becomes Muslim and she's from the people of the book, so in the first case, they both became Muslim, right? Maybe on the same day, within a few days from each other. And here he becomes Muslim and she's from the people of the book. So she's still Christian or Jewish, right? They both have the same faith. And so this is an enticement so that he doesn't, alhamdulillah, have to renew the contract. However, if she's not from the people of book and she also accepts Islam during the waiting period, or that the marriage is affirmed. Again, this is such a mercy that they had a contract, whatever, in a church or somewhere, or a synagogue, and or she's not from the people of the book. So she's Hindu. He converts, and she also grew up with Muslims, and she's like, oh, okay, mashallah, I know enough about the deen. And she becomes Muslim during her waiting period, during her iddah, then the marriage is affirmed. Khalas, so you just keep their original contract. If she becomes Muslim and he becomes Muslim during her waiting period, he has the most right to marry her. So they have to... if she becomes Muslim, so the contract would become invalid, and he becomes Muslim during her waiting period, he has the most right to marry her. If the marriage had not been consummated, it's an irrevocable divorce, meaning they need to renew the contract. If they want to marry. So they're newly married. She becomes Muslim first. And then he becomes Muslim during her iddah. So if he becomes Muslim during her iddah, I believe they don't have to renew the contract. If the marriage had not been previously consummated, it is an irrevocable divorce. So in this case, if her iddah is over, they would have to renew the contract. So if one of the... so it would go back to this bullet point. If he becomes Muslim, if she becomes Muslim and he becomes Muslim during her waiting period, he has. So I guess in this situation, and I'll confirm, they probably have to. I'll see if they have to renew the contract. If she's from the people of the book, I'll actually double check this situation, this last one. Okay, it is prohibited to marry someone who is not from the people of the book. Right? In the Maliki school, if one's not from the people of the book, it is prohibited for him. So it is prohibited actually it's prohibited for her. It's prohibited for him to marry someone who is not for the people. She can't marry except a Muslim, obviously. It is disliked to marry a woman of the people of the book. And it's worse if the couple is residing in a non-Muslim land. Why? So here in the West, it would be very makruh. Why? The woman is going to raise the children, and so she's a Jewish or a Christian. She's a Jew or a Christian, right? Because he can't marry other than a Jew or a Christian. He's Muslim, right? So it's makruh in any land, even in a Muslim land. It's discouraged, right? And so the Prophet ﷺ was not allowed to marry anybody not allowed to marry from the people of the book. It's disliked for anyone else from his ummah to marry a woman of the people of the book, and it's very disliked. And I know people who've married people from the somebody who was, I'm assuming she was a Christian. She grew up in a Christian land, although I don't know how many people are Christian in that country now. And like children were raised in that country because the brother moved to her land, and children are non-Muslim. So it's like generations, centuries, 14 centuries of Muslims in his family, and they're not, and his children are not Muslim. He's Ahl al-Bayt. It's just really sad. And when his nephew was doing the same thing, he went and he talked to her, and he talked to the nephew. He talked to, and I don't think he talked to her, but he talked to the nephew. Just really tried to discourage. But it's like, well, it's a little bit, too late. And the nephew was also raised in a very secular environment. Just always dunya, dunya, dunya. Just so much focus on the dunya. And so, he ended up marrying, and now they have, a child together. And from what I was told, the child doesn't pray or fast. And he's also just dunya, just get my job and just, climb the ladder. It's just a mess. So, these rules make complete sense. Because when they're not followed, you see what's happening. So the divorce of a non-Muslim is not considered. So if a non-Muslim had divorced his wife when he was not Muslim, and then they enter Islam, it's not considered. So it's as if they never divorced. But however, if he divorced her and she left the home, he left the home, she left his home, and she's living independently on that, they have to renew their contract. If he apostates, so leaves the deen and converts to a religion of the wife, a'udhu billah, and reverts to Islam, they must renew their contract. A'udhu billah. And it's just really sad because there's so much apostasy going on amongst the Muslims. It's really sad. And this is one of the reasons one doesn't want to marry from the people. Slowly reverts. Or it really weakens his faith, and maybe outwardly he's Muslim, inwardly on the Day of Judgment he's not Muslim. So it's just I'm just amazed at how much of this is going on. If her waiting period, her iddah is completed before he converts, so she converts, and he hasn't yet, and she finishes her contract, her iddah. She completes her iddah, and he hasn't converted yet. It is an irrevocable divorce, and they must renew their contract if they want to get back together. So I think that answers the earlier question. If her waiting period or iddah is complete before he converts. So they were both non-Muslim. She converted. She's still in her iddah. completes her iddah, he hasn't converted, now he converts. So they have an irrevocable divorce. Again, irrevocable will mean he can't just take her back on the same contract. They have to renew their marriage contract or nikah. Inshallah, this is clear. So if I should go back on any, if you want me to redo any of the slides, let me know. If you can still hear me, let me know. So, okay, invalid contracts. So this is the new, so this is the next thing. So this is what we just completed. If any of you want me to go over this again, just let me know. But the last point we mentioned is if her waiting period is completed before he converts. So she became Muslim. So say she was Christian. Right? And she becomes Muslim. And he's non-Muslim. She finishes her iddah and he hasn't converted. But alhamdulillah, he converts. So their marriage contract is over. It's an irrevocable divorce. And they need to renew their contract. And if they want to remarry. Right? They need to renew their contract if they want to remarry. She may not want to. Right? She may, sometimes certain things are a blessing from Allah, so she may not want to. But if she does, so he has the most right to marry her. So that explains the earlier slide. So inshallah, this is clear. If you want me to go over any material, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 points on this. So, okay, next point. So these are invalid contracts. So, excuse me, an invalid contract is a contract that actually didn't happen. It's like it's non-existent. So there's the shirar. So this used to happen pre-Islam, in Jahiliyyah days, so pre-Islamic days. So a man A, this is an example, marries his daughter off to another B, right? A man, with the condition that B marries his daughter off to A. So they're basically exchanging daughters, and they don't, and they don't have a dowry. So two men, they exchange daughters. I marry your daughter with the condition that you marry my daughter, right? And they don't exchange, there's no exchange of dowry. So, and this was a pre-Islamic practice. So, and who knows, it's probably happening now. Okay, or 2, a marriage with the dowry intentionally excluded. So people could not mention the dowry, and they've discussed it, but they actually haven't said, we will not have a dowry. But if it's intentionally excluded, we will not have a dowry. versus if they just, the husband and the wife, they talk about it, or but it's not mentioned at the time of the contract, right? Then that's called, that's another situation. But here where they say we will not have a dowry, the contract is canceled before consummation. Now, if consummation occurs, because marriage contracts, there's just a little bit more leeway than sales contracts because of, for obvious reasons, especially if there's been consummation. You want to try to, it's built on musamaha and mukarama, on letting certain things go. So you'll see that certain things that are let go, especially after you try to make it work, but you have to ask a fiqh scholar and not try to figure it out. But versus, possibly in a sales contract, you would cancel the contract. So after consummation, she's given the dowry of the women of her status. So you look at her paternal female cousins. What were her paternal female cousins given, for example? Right? That's called sadaqul mithl, the like, sadaq, the dowry of women like her, mithl, women like her. So, and then and the marriage would be continued because it's after consummation. So you would, and this is when they intentionally, they say, he says, I'm not giving her a dowry. So, or they agree to not having a dowry. So after consummation, so before consummation, it's like it didn't happen. It's nullified, the contract. Okay, two more invalid contracts. Mut'a, marriage for an appointed time. It's an invalid contract. Nikah during the iddah is also an invalid contract. So she's, still in her waiting period, and he, and they have a contract done. So it's an invalid contract. Okay, inshallah. And I was going to take a break here, but I think we're okay. Okay, maybe we'll take it after this. Okay, so here is, we're going to get into divorce, which needs to be discussed, mashallah. Okay, it's rulings. So just like marriage has 5 Shari'i rulings, potentially, so per se, divorce has 5 rulings. So it could be prohibited, right? If he divorces her, so when is it prohibited? If he divorces her, he will continue to have a relationship with her. So, shaitan comes, causes a lot of waswasa, divorce, he divorces her. He does it 3 times, in one go, bid'i divorce. But then shaitan goes away and they continue to have relations. People end up divorcing their wives. They don't even realize how many times, and they're continuing to live together. Or the man's left the deen and she continues to live with him. If somebody has basic doubts about the deen, that contract, he's left the deen. If they're basic doubts, and these basic doubts are usually have been in the heart for years before they surface. And that's why it's one should never take one's deen for granted, and never assume just because everything's fine and dandy that things aren't okay. And just because somebody's doing the basic 5 prayers, that but they're not doing anything else, and they're in the dunya all day, when the best of creation with the perfect heart, the Sahaba, best community, look at all the things they did to increase their faith. And now people just take their deen for granted. Like, people, the men work for 8 hours, 10 hours. And there's a hadith and then they're in the car for, how long every day. And there's a hadith that the shaitan is with the one who's alone. SubhanAllah. And listening to the news, all these secular things, it darkens the heart, right? So, and there's a lot of marriages where, the man's not Muslim anymore, and it's just really sad. Or she's not Muslim, but a lot of times the mothers are increasing in their faith. They're doing stuff because of their children. So if he's going to have an illicit relationship with her, he can't find another woman and fears doing the impermissible, he can't divorce her. It could be obligatory. Again, these are just some examples. So he's oppressing her and is not able to change. For example, he can find another person and he's not fearful of committing fornication if he leaves her. So either fornication with her or fornication with somebody else. And so on. So these are just, in some situations, it would be wajib. Like sometimes people, if they have some, if they have a very strong personality, they might, and the other person is very weak, they might end up oppressing the person. And it can cause a lot of tribulation. And sometimes the other person, especially if it's a woman, depending on her temperament, if she's melancholic and the man is very choleric and he's unbalanced in his choleric, and he doesn't know what dhikrs to do to balance himself out, and she doesn't know what dhikrs to do. I mean, if, like I mentioned, the shuyukh say for the general public, for them to not have a shaky connection with Allah, they should be reading one juz every day, the equivalent of one juz every day. This is the general public. So, and this is why, and if people are not doing that, there's going to be problems. So, and again, don't assume that you're, just remember the Sahaba and how much they did to maintain their faith. And they weren't even working in the dunya all day like people do now. And that they're made to, if you're working for a company, generally. Recommended. Somebody was telling me that of the 4 or 5 people that she went to college with, I think majority of the women are divorced. So, subhanAllah. And it's very difficult to remarry. SubhanAllah. It's just, and and then just being alone, and then shaitan is with that person, and no desire for children. If somebody has no desire for children with this person, they're excessively arguing, they're fighting, and they may find another wife who's practicing. So one has to ask someone, okay, this is our situation, this has been going on for years, what is my ruling? A lot of times they might go to a counselor, although a lot of the counselors are, they should go to a counselor and go to dhikr sessions and learn their fiqh. So sometimes I heard people say stuff that they've heard their counselors say that causes them despair. So because even the non-Muslim counselors, if they're not well versed in the deen, which many of them are not, they're just spitting out stuff that they're spewing out stuff that they've heard in their trainings. So it causes people, and some of the stuff they're saying is against our aqidah, and it causes people despair. So, okay, discouraged. If it's performed for no reason, I just shaitan comes, eats away at the man, slowly does, waswasa, and just, I know somebody who, husband divorced her. Again, I know, outwardly very practicing. They were from, the same, their relatives, their, was, as long as he was in a Muslim environment, right, things was fine. But left that and went to a non-Muslim environment, non-profit and all. It doesn't matter, non-profit or not, working for a good cause, divorces his wife, and because he wants to marry a non-Muslim, and there's children. But that's what happened. You're in the environment, you're working all day, and you think somehow you can sustain your faith, when the Sahaba would never think that. So, and people weren't working 8 hours anyway. SubhanAllah. working, traveling, and people think that somehow their faith will be sustained automatically. We'll do everything else to maintain that, maintain our physical health, make sure this is ready, that is ready, that gas tank is full, but our spiritual gas tank is, everything else is depleting it. So, and then it's too late. Permissible, he has no sexual appetite, he has no desire for children, and so on. Majority of people these days don't fall into this. Majority of people. I don't know, I can't think of, maybe just, very few people who fall into this category. Because a lot of people will end up doing things that are impermissible, or just not having a companion, and just they're going to fall into, doing things that are prohibited. So majority of people are not in this category. Okay, so the sunnah way to perform divorce is, it's sunnah meaning it's not sunnah to divorce, but if one is going to divorce, la qadar Allah, this is the way to do it. So there's 4 conditions to make it the sunnah way if one is going to perform divorce. The words of divorce are pronounced during a pure period, so not during menses. And it's during a pure period in which he has not had intercourse with her. Right? So if the 4 conditions are not met, then it's not the sunnah way of doing divorce. Only 1 divorce is pronounced, not 3. That's not the sunnah. But it counts. And it counts as 3 divorces in all the madhahib, by the way. If it's 3 divorces, it's even if he says it in one go, it counts as 3 divorces. People are misinterpreting texts. It counts as 3 divorces if he says it 3 times, even in one go, in all the 4 madhahib. And he does not pronounce another divorce until this waiting period is over. So we'll go over how she does her iddah, waiting period, and he doesn't pronounce another divorce until the waiting period is over. He could take her back. The idea is that they might reconcile. But in any case, this is the sunnah way to do it, and the other way is a bid'ah. So people talk about bid'ah. There's a lot of bid'ah in this because people do it 3 times in one go, and it's haram for him to take her back then, because she's divorced 3 times. It doesn't count as one divorce. And then he does zina with her. They say, oh, it's one divorce because he did it in one go. No, it's not. You're doing zina if you take her back. So the bid'ah divorce, if the conditions of a sunnah divorce are not fulfilled, it is a bid'ah divorce. Of course, it counts as a divorce, even though it's bid'ah, but it counts. There's 3 things that, even if they're said in joking or in seriousness, they count as divorce. So words of divorce are really, really serious. And this is one of them. So jokingly divorcing the wife, it counts as a divorce. People, watch these shows where they're jokingly divorcing. It counts. So they're doing it while they're acting. The spouse is divorced. SubhanAllah. And he's required to take her back as his wife unless 3 pronouncements has been made, in which case she is prohibited for him until she remarries another and consummates that marriage. So, and this is really, I kind of added these bullet points just because divorce is such a complicated thing. You have to ask a scholar to know what situation you'll fall into. May Allah protect everybody from divorce, and if it mashallah, if it happens, one should have a good opinion of Allah and just, just renew one's faith and learn from one's mistakes and say, okay, these are things that went wrong and this is what I can do differently. I need to increase my faith. Majority of people haven't taken classes. I need to take classes. I need to talk about this with my husband to be, what classes are we going to take? How are we going to increase in faith? So let's take I'll go back to, let's take a 10-minute break and inshallah we'll resume. I'm going to keep the recording on because it sometimes there's issues when I go offline. So inshallah, maybe less than 10 minutes I'll be on, maybe like 6-7 minutes inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, Bismillah. Okay, Bismillah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Okay, so the waiting period. So how is the waiting period really done? I tried to do it in chart form to make it as clear as possible. So if he divorces her once in this period, it says you are divorced. Then, and she has a menses, right? So again, for it to be a sunnah divorce, he cannot have touched her in this period. So first menses, second menses, so he can take her back. And if he takes her back, she has to go back because she's still his wife, assuming hasn't been 3 divorces. If it hasn't been 3 divorces, if he takes her back, she has to go back because she's still his wife. By the 3rd menses, not right when it starts, but after half a day or a full day, there's difference opinion. So with the 3rd menses, if half a day or a full day has, so she's had the 3rd menses for half a day or a full day, her waiting period has ended and he cannot take her back, even if it was a raj'i or revocable divorce. He cannot take her back at this point. They can remarry, they can renew the contract if it was not a triple divorce, right? With a triple divorce, she would have to marry somebody else and consummate the marriage. Okay, now khul'a is when the wife gives the husband, so divorce is in his hands, and then khul'a is if the wife gives the husband something and he lets her out of the marriage. A khul'a is considered one irrevocable divorce. So even during the iddah, he can't take her back. So even during the iddah, he can't take her back. It's not called a divorce, but it counts. It counts as a irrevocable divorce. So if they decide, after the khul'a, that they want to remarry and it hasn't been 3 divorces, then they would have to renew the contract. That's what that means, that it's irrevocable. So you can't take her back even during the iddah. And she has a waiting period after khul'a if there was consummation. So again, it's like a sales contract. She gives him something. He agrees to let her go, and that's the exchange. It's not necessary that they exchange words. Again, in the Maliki school, like in the sales contract, I can, take something from you and give you money, and and we're both pleased with it. And nobody's forcing anyone visibly, and we exchange, and we don't say anything. That's considered valid. Once he accepts the item, he does not have the option of revoking the divorce, right? It is binding, so he can't revoke it, and she's no longer his wife. So it's irrevocable. Even though she has an iddah, he can't take her back. If they want to remarry, they must renew the contract, assuming he has not, during their marriage, divorced her for a total of 3 times or more. whether at once or on 3 separate occasions. So that's okay. Now this is somebody whose husband passes away, and she could be pregnant, la qadar Allah, or she's not pregnant. So if her husband passes away and she's pregnant, it's straightforward. Her iddah is over when she delivers. So it could be a day, it could be 9 months, it could be, it just depends. So for the non-pregnant woman, whether she's an adult or not, whether the marriage has been consummated or not, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, in all of these above, it's 4 months and 10 days. So it's going to be 4 lunar months and 10 days, right? Whether she's an adult or not, consummated or not, Muslim or non-Muslim. Like that's the waiting period. Okay. And then this is a question that was asked: what is a person allowed to do during the iddah? Or not allowed to do. So what is not permissible, adornment, for example, kuhl, jewelry. So one's not allowed to do some of the stuff if one's leaving the house anyway. But this would be in general, whether one's leaving the house or not. Perfume, scent, dyeing one's hair, although black is allowed, as it is not considered an adornment. So any adornment that is a customary practice of her people, community is not allowed. She may apply oil to her hair, but nothing that has a scent to it. No henna. And then the divorced woman is required to practice the mourning period. So again, she doesn't do these even if she's at home, because she's not allowed to go out in bright makeup in any case. No woman's allowed to go out like that. She must spend the night in her husband's home or the home where the divorce occurred, as this is a right of Allah, and the husband or ex-husband has no authority on this matter. So he can't say, well, you can't do it here. That's not his right to say that. So she has to spend the night during her iddah every night in the home where the divorce occurred. And this is a right of Allah, so he can't, it's not his right. She may leave the house for a valid need and must return by Maghrib. So, I would ask somebody about what a valid need is. So it's going to, vary from person to person. It is important to ask a scholar when in doubt and not assume permissibility. A general rule for all adult women: it is not permitted to leave the house wearing visible makeup or flashy jewelry, strong perfume. Many lotions and soaps have a strong smell now, so I would just be careful about that. And these are some of the things that were mentioned to us very early on when we were studying. And alhamdulillah, for the most part, back then, sisters were, a lot of people changed. It seems like soon after. And now I've seen people, start putting on very visible makeup. It's not permissible to leave the house like that, and strong perfume. And we were told some, a hadith about how women will dress and their, how they will incline and have other people incline to them, meaning men be attracted to them, and how they won't smell the scent of Jannah. It's very, the hadith are pretty scary about that. Okay, and then the rights of maintenance and housing after divorce or death. If the marriage has been consummated, it's a little bit different than if it hasn't been consummated. So what are the rights of maintenance? So nafaqa, basic housing, clothing, food. So if she's been divorced plus her divorce, he divorced her less than 3 times, or she's pregnant, she gets maintenance and housing. If it's 3 times or she's not pregnant, she gets housing only. So he doesn't have to provide for her food, for her clothing, right? If it's khulr, right? So we talked about that, where the woman gives the husband something and he lets her go. It's an irrevocable divorce. So she's not pregnant, right? Because if she's pregnant, she gets maintenance and housing. But if she's not pregnant, she has the khul'a, so she gets housing only. If the husband dies, it's housing if the house was owned or rented by the husband. And if the marriage was not consummated, so there's no waiting period and no maintenance. Now, if they've been alone together, then it would take the ruling of consummation, because a lot of times a couple may not, clearly state whether it's been consummated or not. So one would, if they've been alone together, then these rules would apply. And then some of the expressions of divorce, there's actually a lot of expressions, and so I just, wanted to mention the categories. There's 3 types of expressions. There's the clear expression, right? You are divorced. Past tense. And then there's the idioms, so it's these are figures of speech. They're not as clear, so there could be clear idioms, figures of speech, and then ambiguous idioms. They're not clear figures of speech, right? Expressions. Some expressions are with, through, go back to your parents, things like that. So, that's why I said consult a scholar if you're in this situation. Okay. So it counts towards the 3 strikes, but he must take her back if it's less than 3 divorces. In a Muslim country, a judge would mandate that he take her back. Now we're in a non-Muslim country, those of us that are in a non-Muslim country, in a non-Muslim land, so in the Maliki school, or in the absence of a Muslim judge, a group of Muslims would speak to the husband and tell him to take her back. So, inshallah, we can establish this group in our communities. Okay, terminal illness. So it's an illness that typically a person would die from, like, stage 4 cancer, things like that. One with a terminal illness may not marry, so man or woman, and if they do, the contract is nullified before and after consummation. If nullified after consummation, she is given the dowry of those like her, as long as it does not exceed 1/3 of the wealth. Because 1/3 of the wealth he can give to whomever he wants. Right? The other 2/3, once there's a terminal illness, the person can't touch the 2/3. The 1/3 is he or she can do whatever they wish, and she does not inherit. And vice versa. If she has a terminal illness, he does not inherit from her. A divorce during a terminal illness is binding, but she inherits if he dies from that illness. Because one of the understandings is that it's one's removing inheritors. So it's not applied. The divorce counts, but she still inherits. Okay, these are I think some of these you might be familiar with, non-marriageable, the mahrams, the mother of the wife becomes a mahram as soon as the contract is complete. So as soon as they do the nikah, even if he hasn't consummated the marriage, she's his mother-in-law. The wife's daughter, so if she's a daughter from another marriage, becomes a mahram to the current husband as soon as the marriage is consummated. So once they do the contract, until they have consummated it, she's not, the stepdaughter would not be his mahram, so they can't be alone together, things like that, until he's consummated the marriage with her mother. the father-in-law is a mahram, but not the step-father-in-law, right? So her husband has a stepfather, so his mother remarried. So he has a stepfather. That stepfather is not going to be her father-in-law. So he's not a mahram. And then if he consummates the marriage, her mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, so on, all the way up, right? Likewise, daughter, granddaughter, great-granddaughter are prohibitive for him. Okay, and then here's something that, if a woman wants, if the situation is very dire and, she's done a lot of istikhara, she's talked to people, she's talked to scholars, and last resort, she asks him, the divorce, Allah Ta'ala has placed divorce in the hands of the man, but she asks him for a divorce, and there's a couple of things he can do. He can give her ownership of the divorce, right? Or he can give her the choice of a divorce. So so they're slightly different and depend on the wording. And they're limited to the sitting. So he can say, I give you ownership of yourself, your affair, or divorce is in your hands, or you are divorced if you wish. Once she tells him, so he tells her this and she says she wants a divorce. He has to agree if it is a single divorce, but he may deny her anything more than one. So he's given her ownership. So it's, and then she said, okay, I take that. It's in the same sitting, meaning they're still discussing it. And he says, okay, I give you, it's in your hands. It's your affair. And she said, I take it. Once he says that, it's a single divorce. But if she says, no, I wanted two, he can disagree to the 2 or 3. But the single divorce he can't deny. Now, if he says, okay, I give you, choose yourself, he says, or choose 1 divorce or 2. If he gives her the choice of choosing herself, and she does, if he says, choose yourself, it counts as 3 divorces. If he says, choose 1 divorce or choose 2, then it counts as 1 divorce, depending on what number he mentions. If there's a disagreement between the husband and wife in terms of the number of divorces that he gave her, he must do so in the same sitting, right? If he says, no, I gave you this number, they need to have the discussion in the same sitting. So what does it mean? What does the same sitting mean? It means as long as they're on the same subject of conversation, it is considered the same sitting. But once they change the subject, whatever she has decided at that point is what is affirmed. Once she vocalizes her decision, she may not retract it. So going back here, he gives her ownership or he gives her the choice of a divorce, right? And so in this situation, he says, I give you ownership. Divorce is in your hands, or you're divorced if you wish. And she tells him, I want it. I want the divorce. So in this situation, it's a single divorce. If it's a single divorce, he has to agree to it. Right? But if he disagrees with her, she says, I want 2 divorces. If he wants to disagree, he needs to do it in the same sitting. So before they change the subject and start talking about other things. Okay, now custody. So again, please speak to someone if it's if you're in this situation. So if there's a divorce, the mother receives custody until the boy reaches puberty. So the mother of the children, until the boy reaches puberty and the daughter marries and the marriage is consummated. So if the mother dies or remarries, I mean, unless the ex-husband and wife, unless the two parties, they come to an agreement, which is really the best thing, that, because otherwise the children suffer. But this is the fiqh of it. If the mother dies or remarries, the grandmother, maternal then paternal, receives custody unless the current husband and the ex-husband agree to the children remaining with the mother. A lot of times that really is the best. If the grandmother is not suitable or not available, so if she's not suitable to raise the children, she's not bothered with them, she's very busy with her own husband, then it would go to the aunt. The maternal, then the paternal. And then likewise, if the suitability is not there, the aunt's busy with her own husband, her deen is not very strong, things like that, then the paternal relatives in the order of the laws of inheritance. Okay, and then here's a point that some of it's related to marriage, some of it is they're just general rulings. So basic maintenance is obligatory upon whom? First of all, basic maintenance means basic food, housing, clothing. It's upon the husband to provide for the wife and the children until the boy reaches puberty, assuming he's not afflicted with an illness, anything that hinders the ability to work. He has to provide for the children, and the daughters he has to provide for until the marriage is consummated. If she marries someone who's unable to provide for her, then the father still has to support her financially. No, and then, okay. So basic maintenance is obligatory upon the children if they're financially able. They have to provide for their parents if the parents are in need. And the children, they need to provide for the mother, even if she remarries, but her new husband is not able to provide for her. Her children would need to provide for her if they're working and they're financially able. Now I mentioned this, that the father still has to provide for the daughters. So generally the father only has to provide for the daughters if they're not married, or they're married but the marriage hasn't been consummated. But in this situation, she marries someone unable to provide for her and the marriage has been consummated. But if the husband is not able to provide for her, and this was known, then the nafaqah, the basic maintenance, is still upon the father. And Jazakallah khair for attending, and that's it. I left out a lot of detail, just because I thought I'd make it as basic as possible, and this is still a lot of detail. So Jazakallah for attending. Please do provide any feedback. It's generally helpful, and Jazakallah khair. Jazallahu anna sayyidina sallallahu alayhi wa sallam ma hu ahlu. Jazallahu anna sayyidina sallallahu alayhi wa sallam ma hu ahlu. Jazallahu anna sayyidina sallallahu alayhi wa sallam ma hu ahlu. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.